Microsoft has banned its own employees from using the DeepSeek app for over a year. And today, that same Microsoft is seriously considering hosting that same Chinese model inside its flagship enterprise product. Curious. This contradiction isn't a side detail. It's the entire story behind what's happening right now across the Copilot ecosystem. And it's the thread I'm going to follow with you throughout this video, because it runs through nearly every issue that matters in enterprise AI today: cost, security, data sovereignty, and the way major platforms are redesigning their dependence on underlying models. Pause. Let's start from the beginning and take this slowly. What Copilot Cowork actually is. On June 16th, Microsoft announced the worldwide general availability of Copilot Cowork. This isn't the Copilot you may already know, the one that summarizes an email or drafts a paragraph in Word. Cowork is the agentic version of the product, and the difference in nature is worth pausing on. A standard assistant answers a question. You write, it responds, and the exchange ends there. An agent receives a goal, and it's up to the agent to figure out the path to get there. It breaks the task into steps, pulls data from your internal systems, opens files, calls third-party tools, checks its own results, retries when needed, and returns after some time with finished work. Not a draft, a deliverable. The product comes out of a 3-month testing phase inside Microsoft's Frontier program, launched in March 2026. And the numbers from that phase speak for themselves. More than half of the Fortune 500 tested it, including names like Accenture, Avanade, Capital Group, Coke, Ooredoo Qatar, and Zurich Insurance. One engineering team used it to edit batch job spreadsheets and automatically generate dependency flowcharts after every change. Another team compared nearly 4,000 files across 2 product versions, work Microsoft estimates would have taken several weeks to do manually. A sales lead used it to analyze a stalled sales pipeline and came back with a ranked list of at-risk opportunities, each one flagged with the exact point where follow-up had gone cold. These are concrete use cases, not abstract marketing promises. And that's exactly what makes the rest of the story interesting. When a tool like this actually works, its economics change shape entirely. Why agentic AI costs so much? This type of artificial intelligence has a structural flaw. It's expensive. Far more expensive than a standard chatbot, and understanding why is essential to everything that follows. A conversational AI processes one message, produces one answer, and stops. An agent can call a model dozens of times to complete a single task. It reads documents, summarizes them, forms a hypothesis, checks that hypothesis against another source, calls a calculation tool, rereads its own draft, corrects it, starts again. Every step burns compute tokens. And the more ambitious the task, the longer that chain of steps gets. That's exactly what's behind the credit-based billing Microsoft just rolled out. The system distinguishes 3 complexity tiers. A light task, which draws on a small number of sources and limited reasoning, consumes between 70 and 200 credits. A medium task, which pulls from multiple sources and produces multiple outputs, consumes between 400 and 600. A heavy task, which aggregates broadly and applies deep reasoning across many outputs, can exceed 1,500 credits. At 1 cent per credit, that's a range running from roughly $1 to more than $15 per task. And that's just the average. Some real-world cases blow past those ceilings entirely. One major U.S. retailer discovered that a single highly active employee had burned through more than 3,200 credits in a single week, nearly $100 in variable cost on top of the base Copilot subscription. That's exactly what Charles Lamanna, who leads Copilot's agents and platform group at Microsoft, saw during the testing phase. Some users were running hundreds of tasks per week. They were remarkably productive, but scaled across thousands of employees, that level of usage became financially unsustainable under a flat rate plan. Lamanna compared the new model to filling up at the gas pump. You pay for what you consume, nothing like a traditional software subscription. And here's a point I think is often underestimated. This shift isn't just a billing detail. It's a change in the economic model for the entire enterprise software industry. For 2 decades, SaaS was built on predictability, a price per user per month, end of story. Finance departments knew how to budget. Agentic AI breaks that predictability because cost no longer depends on how many people use the tool, but on how intensely they use it. Microsoft itself describes this as its most significant pricing change in nearly 20 years. In practical terms, that means IT teams now have to budget AI the way they already budget cloud infrastructure, with consumption alerts, per user caps, spending policies. Microsoft is providing those tools natively, including a tracking dashboard and even a command that lets you see in real time the exact credit cost of a task as it runs. To control the bill, companies have two options: straight pay as you go, no commitment, or a prepaid plan where the company commits to a usage volume in exchange for a discounted rate. Microsoft has also built in a grace period for customers already enrolled in the Frontier program. No billing before July 1st, 2026, to ease the transition. But fundamentally, all of these options only solve a management problem. They don't solve the underlying problem, which is the cost of the model itself. And that's precisely the problem DeepSeek is positioned to address. DeepSeek. Why this specific model? To understand why Microsoft is looking at DeepSeek, we need to step outside the strict Copilot frame for a moment and look at what this model actually is right now. DeepSeek V4, launched in late April 2026, it's a mixture of experts model, meaning it only activates a fraction of its parameters for any given request, which sharply reduces compute cost compared to a dense model of equivalent size. On benchmarks covering agentic tasks, coding, and reasoning, V4 sits in the same range as the leading models from OpenAI and Anthropic, not consistently ahead, but close enough that the performance gap is no longer the deciding factor. The deciding factor is price. According to publicly listed rates, DeepSeek V4 charges roughly 7 to 9 times less than a leading Western model on a per-token basis on both input and output. In some heavy usage scenarios, the gap widens even further. That's an order of magnitude that changes everything under a usage-based billing model like the one Microsoft just rolled out. If an agent has to call a model dozens of times to complete one task, the choice of underlying model becomes the number one lever for controlling cost. And on that specific lever, DeepSeek currently holds a position that neither OpenAI nor Anthropic can claim. That's the purely economic logic behind Microsoft's interest. According to reporting from Axios journalist Ina Fried, confirmed directly by Microsoft, the company is currently evaluating a fine-tuned version of DeepSeek V4 hosted on its own Azure servers as a lower-cost option for Copilot Cowork. A Microsoft spokesperson confirmed it plainly. DeepSeek is one of several open-source models actively under consideration, with more specifics expected in the coming weeks. Right now, Cowork primarily runs on Anthropic models, Opus 4.8 and Sonnet 4.6, with GPT 5.5 access for Frontier program customers. Microsoft is also preparing its own in-house model called Cowork One, post-trained specifically to cut costs on everyday tasks, with a stated goal of reducing model bias and optimizing performance for daily professional use. DeepSeek would be added to that list of options, not replace it. Microsoft is clear on one point. This model would never be turned on by default. It would be offered as a choice to customers, fully hosted on Azure, with customer data never leaving Microsoft's infrastructure, and covered by the same enterprise security and data residency controls already in place. That's an important distinction. This isn't about sending enterprise data to servers in China. It's about fine-tuning and hosting a model whose weights are publicly available entirely inside Microsoft's American cloud. Naming the contradiction. And that's exactly why this announcement lands so strangely, because it collides directly with Microsoft's own public position on DeepSeek. Last year, Microsoft President Brad Smith confirmed before the U.S. Senate that the company bans its own employees from using the DeepSeek app, citing concerns over data security and potential propaganda influence. That position has not, as far as I know, ever been officially reversed. The political climate around DeepSeek remains charged as well. A bipartisan report from the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition with the Chinese Communist Party, published last year, labeled DeepSeek a national security threat, citing data transfers to Chinese authorities and the possibility that the model was trained at least in part using outputs from American models without authorization. So when that same company considers integrating that same model, even fine-tuned and even self-hosted, at the core of a tool used by its largest enterprise clients, the question deserves to be asked seriously, without giving in to either easy outrage or technical naivety. What has actually changed? There's likely an honest technical explanation here. The consumer-facing DeepSeek app, the one Microsoft banned internally, sends data to servers located in China, under a legal regime that requires Chinese companies to cooperate with intelligence services on request. That specific use case is what raises the data sovereignty concern. An open source model, where you download the publicly available weights, fine-tune them, and run them entirely on Azure, is a different architecture. No data crosses into China. No request is ever sent to DeepSeek. On a strictly technical level, the distinction Microsoft is trying to draw makes sense. But that distinction doesn't answer everything. The congressional report also raised concerns that models trained using data or methods potentially derived from American models could end up strengthening China's AI ecosystem indirectly. And on that point, hosting the model on Azure doesn't change anything. The question isn't where the servers physically sit, it's where the architecture came from and what guarantees exist around its transparency. To date, no one has full, verifiable visibility into exactly how DeepSeek V4 was trained. So the question I'm putting to you stays open, and I think it should stay open. Does fine-tuning and self-hosting on Azure actually neutralize the concerns raised a year ago before the Senate? Or does cost pressure, at the scale of millions of Copilot users worldwide, simply end up outweighing the caution Microsoft has shown until now? I don't have a definitive answer to give you here, and I'd be skeptical of anyone who claims to have one with full confidence. What I can tell you is that this tension is going to shape the conversation over the coming weeks as Microsoft clarifies its plans. Microsoft's China business, a blind spot most people ignore. This tension doesn't stop at an internal calculation inside Microsoft. It fits into a very specific political climate, and more importantly, it reveals a much bigger reality that most observers tend to overlook. Microsoft's relationship with China is already, and has been for years, far more developed than people generally assume. According to Bloomberg reporting, ByteDance has, for several years, been Microsoft's biggest AI customer in China, spending more than $1 billion a year on cloud services and models through Azure, largely relying on OpenAI models. Other Chinese tech companies, including Ant Group, Meituan, and Tencent, also rank among the significant spenders in this business. This is possible because OpenAI and Anthropic don't sell their models directly to companies based in China out of caution around intellectual property theft and misuse. But the unique arrangement between Microsoft and OpenAI gives Microsoft control over its own distribution rules through Azure, including for Chinese customers. That's a contractual detail with massive consequences. Microsoft effectively becomes the only legal channel through which Chinese companies can access OpenAI models at scale. This business remains small relative to the company as a whole. Brad Smith told Congress that China accounted for roughly 1.5% of Microsoft's total revenue in 2024. But inside that business, the AI component is growing at a pace worth paying attention to. According to remarks made internally by Microsoft's former chief commercial officer, AI revenue growth in China nearly tripled in the fiscal year ending June 2025, after surging 400% the year before. One line from that executive sums up the strategic position well. The world's most advanced AI solutions are being built on the west coast of the United States and the east coast of China, and Microsoft sees itself as the bridge between those two poles. To limit legal and political risk, Microsoft doesn't host OpenAI models directly on its data centers located in China. Chinese customers access them from infrastructure located in other countries, Singapore in particular. But in practice, that control remains hard to fully enforce. OpenAI has reportedly complained privately that Microsoft isn't doing enough to monitor how some Chinese companies use its models, out of concern that the outputs could, directly or indirectly, be used to train or improve competing models. And this is where the line genuinely blurs. A powerful model can generate code, synthetic data, evaluations, training content. Once those outputs exist, it becomes very difficult to trace where they ultimately get reused. Microsoft now finds itself at this exact moment in a genuinely unique position in the industry, selling Western models to Chinese companies on one side, while considering integrating a Chinese model into a product built for Western enterprises on the other. This isn't about technical performance anymore. It's geopolitics applied directly to cloud architecture, and Microsoft is, as of today, the only Western company operating at this scale inside that exact configuration. WebIQ, the piece. Everyone keeps missing one last piece to place in this picture, and it rounds out the strategy almost quietly. WebIQ, unveiled by Microsoft in early June at its Build conference. On paper, this looks like a minor technical announcement. In reality, it's a critical strategic piece. WebIQ is a retrieval system built on Bing's index but completely redesigned. A traditional search engine is built for humans. It surfaces links, snippets, images, ranked, so a person can click through and read. An agent doesn't work that way. It fires off dozens, sometimes hundreds, of queries over the course of a single task, cross-references sources against each other, and needs dense, verified information delivered as fast as possible without wasting compute power sorting through irrelevant content. Microsoft claims response times under 165 milliseconds for nearly all queries and says WebIQ is roughly 2.5 times faster than the next best alternative. Every result comes back as a structured evidence block, a factual summary, the source, the publication date, and a semantic fingerprint that lets the agent verify relevance without having to reread an entire article. The agent search market is already crowded. Perplexity, the Brave and Exa APIs, and several open source retrieval tools already exist and work well. And it's worth being honest here. In a lot of real-world agentic workflows, search latency isn't actually the main bottleneck. Most of the time gets eaten up by model reasoning, tool orchestration, and context memory management. Access to WebIQ is also currently limited to select Azure customers in early access, which makes the claimed speed advantage hard to verify outside Microsoft's own environment. But the real significance of WebIQ goes well beyond raw performance numbers. It fits into a consistent, almost systematic logic Microsoft has been pursuing for several quarters now. Stop just providing a model and own the entire stack instead. The model, the search layer, enterprise memory, connected tools, the billing system, and the cloud infrastructure running underneath all of it. Copilot Cowork is the clearest showcase of that ambition. It leans on WebIQ to pull fresh information, follows Microsoft 365 security rules, and can now choose between multiple models depending on the exact nature of each task. What this story really says about the industry. So no, DeepSeek isn't replacing OpenAI or Anthropic at Microsoft. That's not the real story, and reading it that way would be far too simplistic a take on what's actually happening here. The real story is that Copilot right in front of us is ceasing to be a single assistant powered by a single model. It's becoming a platform that routes work across multiple models, selected based on cost, quality, security, and the specific nature of each task. For a simple, repetitive task, maybe Cowork won the in-house model at minimal cost. For a task requiring deep reasoning on sensitive material, maybe Opus 4.8. For massive scale, purely technical work where the performance gap matters less than the final bill, maybe DeepSeek hosted on Azure. Microsoft is no longer betting on a single supplier. It's positioning itself as the referee that decides on every single request which model deserves to be called. And this exact shift is worth your attention well beyond this one news story, because it points toward what enterprise AI is likely to look like over the coming years. Not a competition between a handful of dominant models that companies pick once and stick with, but a permanent arbitration layer where the model itself becomes an interchangeable commodity and where the real value shifts elsewhere to whoever controls the enterprise data, whoever owns the security layer, and whoever bills the whole system. This decision to open the door, even cautiously, to a Chinese model shows just how far Microsoft is willing to go to stay competitive on the cost of agentic AI, even if it means having to justify that choice against its own past positions and in front of a Washington that's already watching closely. The coming weeks will tell us whether this decision actually moves forward and, more importantly, how it's received both by the security leadership at major enterprise clients and by the policymakers tracking this issue very closely. This is a story I'm going to keep following closely because it says a lot about where the AI industry is actually heading right now. Subscribe to stay with this story as it develops.